What do fiber, felt, and Fedora have in common? The letter F. This fiber came straight off my alpacas, and it's this fiber I'll use to make a hat. Looking closely, this fiber isn't just dirty, it's chunky. We need to put together 2 tools to make this process a lot easier. First, we need to tear apart this bike, which was conveniently left in the middle of my farm road. Convenient for me because these wheels will work perfect. Not convenient for whichever one of my kids left it here, though. Then along with this 1-inch hardware cloth, some bearings that conveniently fit these dowels, some 2x4s to make a base, and then bam, we're done. This contraption allows me to spin off the dust and debris to make the next step a lot easier. Now that we've finished this part, we have to make the combs. Now what do these combs do, you might ask? Well, they take the fiber, they clean it, they get some of these bigger chunks out of it. They also put all the fiber in line so that when we go to make the felt, we know the orientation of every fiber. I started off by cutting some Osage orange wood. In retrospect, I wish I didn't use this because this really hard, beautiful wood is pretty, but it was way too hard for something I had to deal with in the future. But it looks pretty after being sanded, and we did end up with 4. One for a handle, the others to be bracketed down, but I did end up with an unconventional idea on how to get these teeth for the combs to work. Well, here's my unconventional idea. I'm hoping that these nails will go in, sit just like this. So we're gonna test this on a different piece so I don't ruin these. But then here's my worry, is you see how flimsy that is? Although one was flimsy, it looks like multiples will hold its structure a lot better. And with that done, we can quickly put the rest together. And this is where the wood is starting to give me issues. Because this wood is so hard, it's bending the nails and it's splintering the wood. I wish I would have chose a wood that was a little bit softer. We're now at this point. We've got the bottom comb and the top comb. My clever idea for saving time and building these combs actually cost me so much time in the long run. The nails just weren't strong enough, and it limited how much fiber I can actually pull through at one time. But it still worked. Look at this tangly mess turning into straight fiber. Here is the uncombed fiber, and you could see a lot more chunks like this, or everything's just kind of stuck together. While we have the combed fiber, this is just way more in line. Before the exciting part of turning fiber into felt, we still need to make a hat block. The way I'm choosing to go about this is tracing the inside of a hat that I know already fits. Then measuring both the long and short side of the ovals just to make sure everything is mostly fitting. Once we go and shape the block, I'll use the hat to double check and make sure that the block is a good fit. Now that the template's done, we can use it to get the proper amount of pieces cut out of this foam board. This foam board isn't a normal foam board that you'd get from a craft store. It's actually insulation that I got from Home Depot. I was planning on making this out of wood, but instead of finding a block of wood, pulling out my lathe, and going through that hassle, I figured this would be a quicker result. Now that everything's cut out, we can get each piece stacked onto each other, held together with PVA glue. Then weigh them down, and then we're on to the exciting part. We are now finally turning this felt into fiber. I'm using cheesecloth here for my base, but bamboo mats are traditionally used in this case. Now I've drawn out the circle on the fabric, large enough to accommodate for the crown of the hat and the brim, along with some extra that I can cut off just in case. Now we take all the combed fiber and place it inside of this circle. Felt is such an interesting fabric. It's made by fibers interlocking with each other, creating entangled friction bonds. These bonds are so tightly weaved together that they just become an entire fabric piece. So that's why we're taking all of this fiber, laying it in a circle, and trying to go as dense as we possibly could. If we don't do this properly, there will be holes or thin parts of the hat at the end product. Foreshadow? That did happen. I actually knew that this could have been an issue, so I took some uncombed hair and I even placed that inside of here, trying to make sure that everything was thick enough that there wouldn't be any holes. Now, after all of this setup, we're finally at the felting process. This begins by spraying this entire thing down with water and getting it super saturated and wet, because the more wet this fiber is, the more each thread or hair piece is going to intertangle with its neighbor. So we are going to get this thing as drenched as we possibly can. Now that we're properly drenched, we have to cover this with another piece of cloth. Most people will use bubble wrap here because it will act like tiny little fingers, making the process go a little quicker. But since I didn't have bubble wrap or bamboo mats, I came up with another solution that worked out great. The trash bag along with soap really helped me in this beginning stage. Then once the fabric was felted enough and I could use my hands without the fiber sticking to it, I then switched to just using water, soap, and my hands to really massage this fiber. This part of the process is so cool because you get to see this fiber mess turn into an actual fabric sheet. But this process did take a really long time. I was here for a few hours just moving the fabric around, trying to get it more entangled together, making it a more and more cohesive piece of fabric. And after what felt like an eternity, I finally ended up with a felted sheet of fabric. But a piece of fabric does not magically turn into a hat. We need to start shaping this fabric before it gets too intertwined so that it has somewhat of a hat shape and can be stretched over our hat block. Massaging the felt makes all the fibers get closer together, which actually shrinks the fiber in those areas. And this is what helps shape the hat over an object. Now at this point, we've got the basic shape done, and now we've got to go and finish the hat block. I traced out our previously made template and got to cutting. After 2 days of letting this PVA glue dry, everything was solid, so I thought. The outer layers of glue had solidified, but the inside was still as liquid as it could be. The pressure for me cutting was just too much for the outer layers to hold, and this thing just became a nightmare to cut. So I put this thing off to the side and let it dry for a few weeks. So we've got it finished. I had another issue because just trying to do everything off the hat block, I end up with a hat that fits like this, and that's to the shape of the block. The point of the block is that the block is to stretch the final shape. So I had to find something so I could shrink it past the block shape, and that's where we ended up with this temporary contraption. I'm gonna make something like this out of wood, but basically what we need to do is shape the hat to this cylinder. What we're gonna do is we're gonna shrink all of the fiber to this, then stretch the hat over the hat block. After sitting around for a few weeks, this felt is completely dry, so I am saturating it in a water soap solution. The new shape that I'm using allows for a smaller crown so that when I use the block, I can fully stretch it over the block, giving us a better hat structure. The process of shaping the felt goes much faster when you have an established sheet of fabric, so this part really didn't take me that long. However, this is one of the final felting steps, so we really want to make sure that those fibers are as close together as we possibly can get them. The mother of the alpaca that this fiber comes from is a top-tier championship alpaca for its fiber. I thought that it would provide one of the best hats I could possibly get, but the fiber was so good that it had way too good of a job wicking away moisture. Its hydrophobic nature kept most of the water off of it, which made it really hard to keeping this fiber wet and getting that felting process pristine. Now with that finished, we can finally stretch this hat onto the block. Stretching is exactly what it sounds like. We put the fiber on top of the block and stretch it as far as we can. If I was able to get this fiber a little tighter, the stretching would have been more pronounced, but I think it worked great anyway. Now with it sitting on the block, I need to solidify its shape by ironing it. We can see that there are some issues that I alluded to earlier. There's a spot right in the middle of the crown and a few sparse spots around the rim. I still want this hat to be a wide brim, so it's going to cause some issues when we get to that point. I'm tying twine around the bottom of the crown to keep its shape. There's another tool that I needed to create for cutting the brim, but I was a bit fearful for using it because the brim of the hat had some of those weak spots. So I opted for just using scissors instead, which doesn't give me the perfect roundness, but I figured it was the safer option. Now this is really starting to look like a hat. I'm gonna keep ironing it to solidify the shape and get the fibers really where I want them. Now we take out the hat block and we really see how this hat holds up. How's it look? Now before I go on, I want you to see the hat as it is, because it looks like a floppy mess, and if you were doing this yourself, you'd look at this and be disappointed. But we're not done yet. We're gonna add shellac to the hat, giving it structure and rigidity that will keep the fibers in place, make the hat stiff, and will allow us to clean up all these edges. This 1 quart of shellac should work for 6 hats, but I'm gonna use a lot of this on this hat to really help strengthen some of those weak spots. One huge reason why I wanted my own hat wasn't just for the project, but to have a completely non-toxic hat where I knew exactly where it came from. So I was a little bit hesitant when it came to adding shellac. But I found that the most shellac is a 100% natural compound. It's a resin secreted from a lac bug. A bit gross, but unbelievably cool. And it's this resin that will harden on the hat, giving it its structure. So we need to apply it to every part of this hat to really make it work. And to make it look better, we need to iron it. Ironing allows the resin to soften, which allows me to get rid of most of these wrinkles. They're not all going to be perfect, especially around some of those weak parts of the brim, but I can get most of them out and make this thing look really nice. Since the brim was cut with scissors, it's not perfectly circular, but it's going to have to stay this way because of those weak points. Because the hat is so stiff now, I can actually trim up these edges and make the hat look a lot nicer. This twine's going to be my hat band. It's actually twine that holds a square bale of hay together that I feed my alpacas with. It feels very full circle. And now we can finish up with one of the last parts of this hat, and it's the inside sweatband. I'm cutting up this old 100% cotton shirt and turning this into the inside liner. Now we need to sew it to make it look a little bit better, And then I'll mirror kind of how a modern day sweatband sits inside of a hat. I can use my sewing machine to shape the sweatband, but when attaching the sweatband to the hat, I have to sew it in by hand. Now with the sweatband finished, I can now move on to showing you the completed hat. And with that, we're finished. Thanks for sticking around and being here, and be sure to check out one of these videos that YouTube thinks that you're gonna like next.